A united front against the United States. Donald Trump pulls the U.S. out of the landmark Paris Climate Agreement, saying he's fighting for the American people. But what about the global community and the future of our planet? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. It is a decision that's been met with worldwide condemnation. President Donald Trump announced the U.S. was formally withdrawing from the landmark 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. He was keeping a campaign promise that he made to American workers, especially coal miners. The president made the announcement during a speech at the White House Rose Garden on Thursday, saying the deal would punish America and cost millions of jobs. But world leaders, environmentalists and businessmen have expressed their disappointment with the move as a withdrawal of American leadership in the face of overwhelming scientific evidence. We've got a lot to get to with our guests, but first let's take a listen to some of what President Trump had to say.
In order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord Thank you.
Our Chinese and European Union officials have reaffirmed their commitment to the Paris Accord. They were showing a united front at a meeting in Brussels on Friday to send a strong message to the White House. European Commission Chief Jean-Claude Juncker said there could be no backsliding on the agreement. Andrew Thomas has more on the fallout of Trump's decision.
18 months ago in Paris, there were cheers and tears of joy. There seemed near universal optimism. The world had united behind a global agreement. On Friday, world leaders spoke of a different common sentiment: disappointment.
I do respect this decision, but I do think it is an actual mistake, both for the US and for our planet.
I believe the US President Trump decision completely goes against the wisdom that mankind has developed, so I am deeply disappointed.
It is disappointing. We would prefer the United States to remain part of the agreement.
Canada is deeply disappointed with the US position. The Paris Agreement is a good deal for Canada, and it's a good deal for the world.
In Pacific Island nations, homes regularly flood because of climate change. Fiji's Prime Minister was another to say that Donald Trump's decision was deeply disappointing, especially for vulnerable nations.
So this is a geopolitical issue for America as well as an environmental one. Now, these are countries that are at the forefront of the climate impacts. The rising sea levels are threatening their very existence. And if they feel like they're being thrown under the bus by the Trump administration, they may well turn into the willing embrace of China that wants to expand its influence here.
The United States now joins just two other countries not part of the accord: Nicaragua and Syria. And so far, no other country has suggested it will pull out of Paris too. But environmentalists worry President Trump's decision will lessen their resolve to stick to the spirit of the agreement, as well as their formal commitments. Here in Australia, for example, the government has recently approved a giant new coal mine. Its coal will be mostly exported and burned in China and India, so it won't add much to Australia's emissions, but it will do just as much global damage. One irony is that the Great Barrier Reef, very near the approved new mine, will be one natural wonder to suffer. Over the last 2 years, warming seas have already bleached half the reef of its colour. More warming will make that worse. President Trump promises to make America great again. But in France, where the nationalist view lost out to a more global outlook in recent elections, the new president had this to say.
Because wherever we live, whoever we are, we all share the same responsibility. Make our planet great again.
Andrew Thomas, Al Jazeera, Sydney.
So let's bring in our guest now. Joining us from Imperial Beach, California, is Gina Loudon, a former Trump campaign media surrogate and author. In Washington, Michael Dorsey, director of the Sierra Club, the largest environmental organization in the United States. And in London, Damian Ryan, the director of strategy at the Climate Group. Thank you all for being with us. So, Gina Loudon, let me start with you then. This is a deal that was signed, that was originally signed by President Obama, along with nearly 200 countries around the world. The United States has now pulled out and joins only 2 other countries, I believe Syria and Nicaragua, who are not part of this deal. Are these 194 countries all wrong and President Trump is right?
Oh, I think that I totally understand why the rest of the world would want the United States to fund this, because it was very burdensome on the taxpayers of the United States. But you have to remember that President Obama signed this without the consent of the governed. That's not the way we do things here in the United States. If he had had consensus and had run it through the Senate as a treaty, it would have stood much stronger. And this president would have had probably no choice but to go along with it. But as it stood, it was a bad deal for the United States, costing literally millions of jobs, trillions of dollars. And let's remember that this particular agreement allowed China to keep being a top emitter until the year 2030. So this was a bad deal for America, but it was a bad deal for the world. And President Trump has made it clear that he was willing to renegotiate it, that he is willing to continue to discuss these issues and come to some agreement, but that this was a bad agreement.
Well, you say that this is going to cost the United States trillions of dollars and millions of jobs. What do you base those figures on? Because the reason I ask that as well is 630 businesses and investors with names including DuPont, Hewlett-Packard, Pacific Gas and Electric. Last year, at the end of last year, after President Trump was elected and he was contemplating pulling out of this deal, they signed an open letter urging him not to do that. They also CEOs, I mean, major business leaders, including Elon Musk of Tesla, Jeffrey Immelt of General Electric, Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs, all saying this decision would ultimately hurt the economy by ceding the jobs in clean energy and technology to overseas. These are not bleeding heart liberals we're talking about, are they?
In some cases, but they all do definitely share one thing, and that is that they were going to make money off of this. In fact, Elon Musk has made a lot of money off of this particular agreement funded by the taxpayers of the United States. We're talking about billionaires here who do not need to be funded by middle-class Americans. But as you saw yesterday, after the president did pull out of this bad agreement, the United States stock market went through the roof. So apparently the markets are responding very well. And when the markets respond well in the United States, as they have, in agreement with this president pulling out, that's good for the world economy. You know, the United States has been a leader in cutting emissions. We have cut emissions more than any other country. And the United States will continue to be a leader. And I think yesterday's market launch was a great indicator of what's to come. Thank you to President Trump's leadership on this. Michael
Dorsey, this Paris Accord doesn't legally constrain any country, including the United States. So what practical effect will this actually have? President Trump saying that the U.S. will pull out.
Well, you know, Hazem, it shows a stunning lack of sophistication for the president to pull out of a voluntary agreement. It's also just nonsense that this is a burden on the U.S. economy, on workers. The fact is that we've got more people now. There are more people in solar and wind in Texas than there are working in oil and gas. There are more people in the solar industry alone in California than working in the entire entertainment industry. The fact is that the jobs now are in the renewable sector. They're not, certainly not in the coal industry, where the president was claiming jobs are going to be created. The mine that he mentioned yesterday, actually it's owned by Canadians. And only opening up to about 70, measly jobs. There's more people right now working in Walmart than there are in the entire coal industry, which is a crumbling, bankrupt industry. The reality of the moment is that the new energy, 21st century energy, is renewable. That process is surging ahead. It's a $1 trillion opportunity that the president bizarrely and disturbingly walked away from. Shameful that we have this level of waywardness in the White House.
He said, President Trump said that this deal would impose unfair environmental standards on on American businesses and workers. What do you say to that?
Absolute nonsense. The fact is that the Paris Agreement, when we were there putting that together, I was there in Paris with many colleagues, it's really an opportunity for innovation. It's basically, it doesn't bind the United States. It's a voluntary agreement. The president has the ability to innovate. If he wanted to, he could propose more market-based approaches. He could propose more opportunities to bring businesses to the table. He simply walked away from this. It's really an example of waywardness. It's an example of the lack of sophistication in the executive office. And it's a pity because really, it's not just the world's governments are really pushing this forward. A third of the Fortune 100 are with this agreement. The largest publicly traded oil company on the earth, ExxonMobil, is with this agreement. Everybody is with this agreement, and the one wayward individual is the president standing alone by himself. It's a shame.
Damian Ryan, I want to get your take on this, and I want to ask you as well, because again, President Trump was, his supporters say, simply keeping a long-held campaign promise and sticking to that promise to protect American jobs first, which he says is his priority. That was what he was elected on. What do you say to that?
Well, I think his announcement, he's clearly talking to his base, and he said that outright. But I would agree with what's just been said about the fact that the opportunities now are actually in these new clean tech industry sectors. They're not in coal mining, they're not in gas and oil. So in some ways, he's actually going to harm his base because some analysis has shown that some of the greatest opportunities for wind and solar are actually in the states that voted for Trump. So the decision that he took yesterday is in fact going to harm the very people that voted for him. Now, that's not going to play out in a week or a month or so, but I suspect that by the end of this term, the Trump administration will find that it's actually hurt its voters by taking the decision that it did yesterday.
Are you concerned, though, as well, that this might prompt other countries that signed the accord to now withdraw from the agreement? Because many countries that look to the United States for leadership and they see this decision now, are they going to rethink their emissions pledges? No,
I'm not. I'm not concerned. It's been very clear from European leaders, from the Canadians, Australians, and many of the developing countries as well, that they are completely behind the Paris Agreement. I think what we have to remember is that there was a huge amount of diplomatic capital poured into the Paris Agreement. I mean, to put this into historical perspective, the Paris Agreement is up there with the post-1945 establishment of the UN, of the Bretton Woods institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF and ultimately the World Trade Organization. This is the level of input that was put in by political leaders around the world. They are not going to squander that just because a single person in a single administration has decided to withdraw. So I remain confident that leaders will actually come around and really focus on making sure that Paris is a success over the coming years.
Gina Loudon, I'll come back to you then. I want to put the point back to you then that Damian made there, that this move could actually end up hurting many people in regions of the United States that supported President Trump.
Well, America doesn't think so, and this president doesn't think so, and I would just guess that his advisors here in the United States who are giving him these numbers, from the National Economic Research Association is where the numbers that I cited came from, saying that this would cost $3 trillion for the United States. That it would mean about, I think it was 6.5 million jobs, if I remember correctly, is the number that they came up with. Those are a lot of jobs, and none of the environmental, solar, wind jobs that one of your other guests mentioned, none of those have to go away. This agreement has nothing to do with the fact that the United States has been and will continue to be the leader in the world on climate issues. And the president has made that very clear. This in particular was a bad deal. Allowing China to continue with the highest of emissions until the year 2030 doesn't sound like a very sound deal to me. And there's nothing that precludes this president from going forward and working with other countries to continue to make sure that our world environment is taken care of. And I would submit.
So sorry to jump. If I could just jump in there for a moment, Gina. Just to be clear, you accept that there is climate change and that it is man-made?
This is what I know, that the climate is cyclical. Science has proven that over and over again. I myself think it might be a little arrogant to think that we're going to change the natural cycles of the Earth in 100 years or something like that. And I also know this, that according to scientists at MIT, very well renowned as you know, they say that if all emissions were cut by all participating nations to zero, that it would make less than 0.2% or 0.2 degrees Celsius difference in this global warming theory. But here's the important part of this. I would really submit to your guests and to those analyzing this to look at who the proponents are and to ask yourself, are they being paid by this? Are they being subsidized by this
many
agreement?
People will put that same point to the people who oppose this agreement, that they're being paid by people like representatives of the coal industry and so on.
I'm not. Can your other guests say that?
I know Damian Ryan wants to respond to some of this. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first point, the reference to the MIT scientists, that's wrong. What they have said is that based on the current pledges, which we have to remember from the 196 or 7 countries that have signed up, that's only through to 2020 based on the pledges they've made already. This isn't looking out beyond that. The whole point of Paris was that we would ratchet up every 5 years. So that's all the MIT scientists have looked at. Everyone knows that the commitments made so far are are insufficient. But the whole point is that we come back in 5 years and we ratchet up. We learn from the experience we've had every 5 years and we ratchet up in order to take emissions down, to keep the global increase in warming below 2 degrees. The other 2 factual inaccuracies, one was that China will continue to grow its emissions through to 2030. The fact is that China has peaked its emissions. It's flat and it has been for the last 2 years. The expectation is that will continue. And the third point is the reference that Gina made earlier to the fact that the US has reduced emissions more than any other country in the world. Again, that is completely and utterly wrong. The US emissions have actually increased since 1990. Compare that with the European Union, for example, where they're on track to meeting their 2020 target of a 20% reduction in emissions by that date from 1990. So those are the facts.
Michael Dorsey.
There are people that don't think the moon landing took place. There are people that still think the Earth is flat. What do we do with those folks? We simply ignore them because they are less than serious and sophisticated. And this is an example of this kind of level of, I think, silliness that we need to just step away from and step around. The fact is that climate change is a serious problem. Indeed, while the president was speaking, we're seeing one of the largest ice shelves break off from the South Pole and potentially to become one of the largest recorded icebergs in history. So the fact is that this crisis is playing out. It's affecting people on the margins. It's affecting very poor people around the world as well as in the United States. It has huge consequences, but at the same time, we're seeing right now a huge renewable industry unfold around the world. That industry is leading by leaps and bounds over the old 20th century technologies of fossil fuels. The fact is that the world is stepping forward. And in terms of your question about which countries are going to be at the table, I don't think we're going to see countries walk away. Indeed, while the president was speaking, the Chinese were putting together a new commitment with the EU and the Canadians to surge forward in this process. Right now, China leads the world in renewable energy. We walked away from a really amazing opportunity, a $1 trillion train that left the station. The president decided not to be on it. Shameful.
Yeah, your response to that, Gina Loudon, particularly this view that the United States has shirked its responsibilities as a traditional global leader in the world that it has had for since the end of the Second World War.
Well, that's simply not true. And in fact, this shows great
It's not true that the United States has been a global leader?
By the United States president. It is absolutely true that the United States has been and will continue to be a global leader, and on this issue as well. You know, there was scientific consensus once upon a time that the world was flat as well. But the thing is, you have to take a critical look at the so-called science and see where the money is coming from. And it is true that many profit from some so-called science, and we've seen this repeated over and over again. So we have to look skeptically at who's telling us what. I happen to believe the research that I've read that has come out of Heritage Foundation, out of MIT, out of you know, these different organizations that I've mentioned. Some of your other panelists are looking at other data, I guess, that I haven't seen, but I'm telling you that when you look at the science, it says simple things like it's been much hotter in the past 1,000 years, that climate is cyclical, and no one has said that the United States won't continue to be a pioneer in technology going forward. No one has said that.
Damian Ryan, you're shaking your head there.
To an agreement. We simply said this agreement was bad.
This whole idea that the scientific community is somehow paid to produce these numbers, it's a conspiracy theory. So there's no point in even talking about it. You know, it shouldn't even come up in a conversation. I think what we need to focus on is the solutions and what other actors are doing now to step into the space that has been left vacant by the Trump administration. And the really good news is that businesses and governments at other levels, including in the US, are actually doing fantastic things on climate and clean energy. So you can look at California, for example, where you've got Governor Brown, you know, pushing forward amazing policies around electric vehicles and battery storage. There's a carbon trading in place there. You've got Governor Cuomo in New York, again committed to bold climate action. And then you've got these businesses who accept the science and understand the risk. And this is the key thing. They understand that climate change poses a risk to their businesses. And therefore, they're taking action in order to mitigate that risk. For example, by adopting 100% renewable energy targets. You know, we work with nearly 100 global international companies who are making this commitment to 100% renewable through a campaign called RE100. Now, they're helping to shift the market, and we're only just beginning to see the impact that's having. And I think that's what we need to focus on: these solutions, these leaders in business and other levels of government.
Gina Loudon, you were saying earlier that you doubt some of these scientific studies, even though there have been many independent funded studies that have said that climate change is happening, and it is happening at an accelerating rate. You recognize as well that solar industry is, the clean energy industry is a growth industry. If, for the sake of argument, you turn out to be right 20 years from now, what's the worst that would have happened? Some economic hardship in the short term and a cleaner environment in the long term. What's wrong with that?
Well, when we're talking about, you know, trillions of dollars and millions of jobs in the United States, that's a big deal. And I'm not denying that there are changes.
I'm sorry, Gina, you keep putting these figures out about billions of dollars. What are they based on?
That's based on the National the National Association of Economic, NERO, it's the National... NERA Association.
We are running out of time, but just in the time we've got left over, just want to get our other two guests a point here. Michael Dorsey, go ahead briefly.
Look, the smart money has left the room on this. The governor of California was on his way to China while the president was doing this silliness. He was going to China to negotiate connecting the carbon markets of California and China. 280 of the largest funds have all decided to move ahead on this issue. They've got more than $17 trillion of money under management. You know, indeed, not only, you know, that's the future. It's renewable, it's green, it's clean, it's healthy.
All right, Damian Ryan, briefly back to you.
Well, no, I was just going to pick up on this study that Trump used in his address yesterday. I mean, the analysis that's coming out has shown that it's basically picked a particular scenario which doesn't take account of the positive impacts of innovation. It doesn't take account of the growth in renewables. It basically assumes the worst. And you know, as our other guest was just saying, it's that the markets are actually already showing where the money is, and it's not going into fossil fuels, it's not going into coal, it's going into clean energy.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much to all three of you, Gina Loudon, Michael Dorsey and Damian Ryan. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And thank you again for watching. Remember, you can see the program anytime. Visit our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.